Hey Magic players, this is Ben with MTG Frontier Guide, and today we're doing a deck tech for Abzan Midrange. Now we're going to start the deck out with 4 copies of Siege Rhino. This is one of the main reasons to actually run the Abzan Midrange deck, is so you can play the Rhino. He's a 4/5 with Trample, and when he enters the battlefield, each opponent loses 3 life and you gain 3 life, so there's a 6-point life differential right off the bat before he even starts to swing. And then we have 2 copies of Anafenza the Foremost. She's got a 3 converted mana cost and she's a 4/4, so she already has great stats for her cost. And whenever she attacks, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on another target tapped creature you control. And also, if a creature would be put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, you exile that card instead, which can actually prevent some graveyard shenanigans associated with creatures being in the graveyard, or even the delve cost associated with some cards. Next up, we've got 4 copies of Warden of the First Tree. Warden of the First Tree comes out as a 1/1 for 1 green mana, and he has the ability to basically level up like some of the older cards. For 2 mana, you get to turn him into a 3/3. For 4 mana after that, you get to give him Trample and Lifelink. And then in the late game, if you pay 6 mana, you get to put 5 +1/+1 counters on him, and you can do that for however much mana you have, or every turn until he dies or you just win the game from a trampling lifelinker. We're also running 2 copies of Tireless Tracker. He's a 3/2, and when a land enters the battlefield under your control, you get to investigate. He especially works great with fetch lands because you get a clue the first time you play the fetch, and then when you crack it and put another land in play, you get another clue. When you sacrifice those clues to draw a card, you get to put a 1/1 counter on Tireless Tracker, so he's good for providing card advantage and something to do with your mana later on in the game. So whenever you're drawing those lands in the late stages, you can crack those clues and get some relevant spells. We have quite a few 1-of creatures in the deck. The first one is going to be Thalia, Heretic, Cathar. She's a very good 3-drop. She's got first strike, and she causes the creatures and non-basic lands of your opponents to enter the battlefield tapped. So she just kind of helps us stall the opponent out for us to get to the later portion of the game, which is what we want to do with our mid-range deck. The next 1-of is Wingmate Roc. It's a 3/4 flyer, and you want to wait until after you've attacked to cast this one because it has raid, and so whenever it enters the battlefield, if you attacked with the creature this turn, you put a 3/4 white bird token with flying onto the battlefield. Also, when Wingmate Roc attacks, you gain 1 life for each attacking creature, so it helps gain back some of the life that we might have lost in the early stages of the game. Our next 1-of is Kalitas, Traitor of Ghet. Kalitas is a 3/4 with lifelink, and whenever a non-token creature an opponent controls would die, you exile that creature instead, and you put a 2/2 zombie token onto the battlefield. You can also sacrifice those zombies and put 2 +1/+1 counters on Kalitas as well. He's great against any kind of aggro deck because he's a 3/4, so he makes a pretty good blocker, and he also gains you back any life that you might have lost as well. Once again, we are a mid-range deck, so we need to be able to stabilize as we get towards those middle rounds of the game. And our last creature in the deck is 1-of Tasigur the Golden Fang. He's a 4/5, and he has a normal converted mana cost of 5 generic and 1 swamp, but he has delve, so you can potentially cast him for as little as just the 1 black mana. He has another ability of paying 4 mana, putting 2 cards from your library into your graveyard, and then you get to return a non-land card of an opponent's choice from your graveyard to your hand. So you can actually delve away some of the cards that you're not necessarily interested in getting back, and hopefully get back something that will help you finish closing out the game. Okay, so we're going to start our non-creature spells out with 3 copies of Oath of Nissa. When Oath of Nissa enters the battlefield, we get to look at the top 3 cards of our library, and we can reveal either a planeswalker, a creature, or a land card from among them, and put that into our hand. So in the early stages of the game, it helps us smooth out our land draws, and if we draw it later on in the game, it helps us find either that creature or planeswalker we're looking for to help close things out. And And then we're running 2 copies of Dromoka's Command. Dromoka's Command can be very useful. It's a very versatile card. You get to pick 2 of the modes on the card. The first one is prevent all damage that target instant or sorcery spell would deal this turn. It's very good against any kind of burn type removal. The next mode is target player sacrifices an enchantment, so you can use it to get rid of any kind of problematic enchantment. The other 2 modes, which are usually where I like to use it, it's put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, and target creature you control fights target creature you don't control. So usually the way I typically use it is I put a +1/+1 counter on one of my creatures and then have that creature fight whatever the problematic creature is on the other side of the board. And then we're also running a 1 of Abzan Charm because of the versatility. We can use it to either exile target creature with power 3 or greater, draw 2 cards and lose 2 life, or distribute 2 +1/+1 counters among 1 or 2 creatures. And it is instant speed, so we can do it as a combat trick as well, or we can draw the cards at the end of their turn before we go into our next turn. So it can be very useful at any stage in the game. Next up, we have 4 copies of Fatal Push. It lets us destroy a creature with converted mana cost 2 or less, or if we have Revolt, we get to destroy a creature with converted mana cost 4 or less, which we are playing Frontier, so we do have access to fetch lands, so it can be fairly easy to trigger that Revolt for the card. And if not, it helps us clear the board in the early rounds to help us survive to those middle rounds, which is what we want to do since we are running that mid-range deck. We're also running 1 copy of Murderous Cut. Murderous Cut is an instant speed destroy target creature spell. It does have Delve, so you can potentially cast it for as little as just the 1 swamp. We also have a 1 of Collective Brutality. Collective Brutality has Escalate, so we can discard a card to choose additional modes beyond the first one, which can be beneficial when we're trying to cast one of our Delve cards. We can have the opponent reveal their hand, and we get to choose an instant or a sorcery card from it, and they discard the card. We can give a creature -2/-2 until the end of turn, or we can have an opponent lose 2 life and us gain 2 life. And we're running 2 copies of Transgress the Mind. Target player reveals his or her hand, and we get to choose a card from it with converted mana cost 3 or greater, and then exile that card. So it can help in the early game get rid of any of their big threats, which once again allows us to get to that mid to late game, which is what we want to be doing with our deck. And then we'll move into our Planeswalkers. The first one is 1 copy of Liliana the Last Hope. Her plus ability gives target creature -2/-1 until your next turn, so it helps protect her so she can hopefully get to the ultimate. Her -2 ability lets you put 2 cards from your library into your graveyard, and then you can return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. And then her emblem is, at the beginning of your end step, you get to create X 2/2 black zombie tokens, where X is 2 plus the number of zombies you control, so they exponentially get bigger as each turn goes on. It's pretty much an auto win. It's pretty hard to fight through an ultimate if you can get her to that point. And we have 2 copies of Gideon, Ally of Zendikar. His +1 ability turns him into an indestructible 5/5, and you prevent all damage that would be dealt to him this turn. He doesn't have haste, so you're not going to be using that ability when you first put him out, unless for some reason you need to get him up over that 4 loyalty counter, so that way you can use it the next turn. But typically what you'll do is the 0 ability, which creates a 2/2 white knight ally token. And then also he does have the ability of the -4, which makes the emblem that creatures you control get +1/+1. Not too often with this deck are we going to be using that option. It's more going to be just making the knight tokens with him, or plussing him and then swinging in with the 5/5. And then we have 1 copy of Ob Nixilis Reignited. His +1 ability lets you draw a card and then you lose a life. His -3 destroys target creature, and his ultimate gives an opponent an emblem that whenever a player draws a card, they lose 2 life. So his ultimate will close the game out very quickly if you happen to pull it off, but he can be very useful as far as just the card advantage that he can provide, and then also just destroying whatever problematic creatures that they might have. And we'll finish up the Planeswalkers with 1 copy of Sorin Grim Nemesis. His plus ability lets you reveal the top card of your library and put that card in your hand, and then each opponent loses life equal to the converted mana cost. So it provides card advantage while making your opponent lose life, which can be very beneficial in those late stages of the game when you bring him out. His negative ability lets you deal X damage to target creature or Planeswalker, and then you gain X life, which once again can be great in those late stages when you're stabilized and you're making that final push to close out the game. I've never actually ulted Sorin, but if you do, you get to create a number of 1/1 black vampire knight creature tokens with lifelink equal to the highest life total among all players. We do have quite a bit of life link and life gain in this deck, so that number could actually end up being quite high. Okay, so we'll move into our mana base. We're going to start out with 4 copies of Flooded Strand, and then 3 copies of Wooded Foothills, and those are going to be the fetch lands that we use to go grab our different colors that we need. And then our dual lands are going to be 2 copies of Canopy Vista, 2 copies of Smoldering Marsh, 1 copy of Sunken Hollow, and 1 copy of Prairie Stream. And then we're also running 2 copies of Blooming Marsh and 2 Concealed Courtyards as fast lands to kind of help speed up those early rounds. And then we're finishing up the deck with just 3 basic swamps, 3 basic forest, and 2 plains. Now, as usual, your sideboard will be heavily dependent on what your local meta contains. So whatever you're seeing at your local game shops, you'll want to kind of tweak your sideboard accordingly. Some good options can be Tormod's Crypt for any kind of graveyard shenanigans, Hallowed Moonlight if they're running Rally or Collected Companies, doubling up on things like Transgress or Dromoka's Commands or Abzan Charms can always be a good option. If you need early board wipes, you can use things like maybe Flaying Tendrils or the new Yeheni's Expertise. It's real nice to be able to wipe the board and then cast something like a Liliana. So you got plenty of different options in the colors to combat whatever you might be seeing at your local game shop. I'd like to thank y'all for watching. This again is Abzan Midrange. If you liked the video, make sure to hit that like button. Go ahead and subscribe if you haven't subscribed already, and leave us a comment. Let us know what you'd like to see in future videos. So once again, thanks for watching. This has been with MTG Frontier Guide. Get out there and play some Magic and have some fun.